Hello everybody. Today I'll be talking about a sensorized robophysical model to study snake locomotion in complex 3D terrain. Snakes have the innate ability to use the body terrain contact forces to quickly and stably transition between different strategies to successfully traverse through a 3D terrain. These contact forces help the snakes to get a better understanding of an unknown environment. As snakes move through a 3D terrain, they don't slip much, rather, they adapt their body shape. Our hypothesis is that while vision is used to adjust the direction, the body feels the environment by maintaining contact and pushing against the terrain effectively using tactile sensing. We know very little about how tactile sensing works. Hence, we need to develop a sensorized robophysical model to study this. Many current robots use vision or cameras to scan the environment to plan motion using terrain geometry. Some robots use methods such as passive mechanical compliance and control compliance that make the robots to try to maintain contact, but we don't really know how to deform the body to push against the obstacles to generate the right forces in response to the terrain contact. These methods either make the robot move very slowly or slip a lot. Hence, understanding how these contact forces are exerted or redirected will allow us to better understand the dynamics and come up with better control strategies that would allow the robots to successfully traverse through such terrains similar to that of the snakes. We need to detect forces on each segment of the robot as the robot comes in contact with the 3D terrain. This is a challenge since the robot is 1 meter long in length. Some sensors cannot be easily integrated due to their shape. Here we have scaled the sensors to be roughly the same size with respect to the robot. Most of the sensors in the market are also too bulky to be placed on different points on the robot, and they will add on to the weight of the robot. Not only that, some of the sensors are also quite expensive, and this would add on to the cost. The piezoresistive sensor is the most suitable, but we want to further modify its design to sense force based on the robot's shape and size. We need a sensor that's flexible enough to be placed anywhere on the robot body. Another group recently developed a distributed force sensor that is of low cost and flexible enough to be placed on any of the objects. They use the sensor on a glove and use the glove to grasp different objects. This generates different force patterns which are combined with learning algorithms to differentiate and identify different objects. This sensor uses a piezoresistive film that is sandwiched between parallel conductive threads above and parallel conductive threads below the film. Each intersection of a conductive threads above and a conductive thread below forms a sensor which, when pressed on, causes a change in the resistance of the sensor in the sensor array. This resistance for each of the sensor in the sensor array is read with the help of a circuit that scans through all the sensors. We recreated this sensor in our lab for our experiments. For the calibration process, we applied known forces using standard weights. We varied the weights to calibrate the sensor over a broad range of forces. Using the resistance-force relationship derived from a physics model of a piezoresistive sensor, we fit the data to get the calibration parameters. Using the calibration parameters, we can now estimate the force on any sensor on the distributed sensor array. Here, we have recorded a 4x4 sensor array and pressed on a single point and estimated the forces at that point with varying forces applied. For our proof of concept, we used an already existing robot. We added a EcoFlex layer over the motor connectors of the robot, and we added a sensor over the silicon layer. The silicon layer acts like a cushion for the sensor, which allows the sensor to come back to its original position after being pressed on. We then added a rubber layer to prevent wear and tear of the sensor. Hence, we were able to come up with a 7-segment robot with around 72 sensors in the middle segment. We first tested the robot prototype on flat ground and applied lateral undulation. Each row each row in the graph is the reading for one sensor. For the first 12 seconds, the forces stay constant with small noise. There is a change in the force once the robot starts undulating, which can be seen in the graph on the right. We then tested the prototype on a rubble of wooden blocks. When the robot starts to move, again, there is a change in the force, but not regularly since the sensors are not in contact with the blocks regularly. Rather, as the blocks hit the sensors, you can see a change in force on some of the sensors in the graph. The last few sensors in the graph have much more noise due to the loose contact since the cables were not packed well, which has been rectified in our new design. Our prototype demonstrated that the sensor array worked on the robot. Next, we need to develop a much longer robot since the prototype is too short to help the body move over a complex 3D terrain. Hence, we increased the robot to 12 segments and hope to increase to around 20 segments later on. The current prototype has a lot of gaps between the segments. This may cause the robot to get stuck as it moves over the terrain. Hence, we redesigned our robot to have less gaps between each of the segments. Our new design has two types of segments. The first segment is a yaw segment, which allows the segment to move in the horizontal direction, while the second segment is a pitch segment, which allows the robot to move in the vertical direction. Our prototype has around 72 sensors on one segment that would give us around 864 sensors on a 12-segment robot of this particular prototype. When we characterized the sensing frequency, we found out that the frequency is about 6 Hz, which is too low. As a compromise, we decided to cut down the number. So here we have the yaw segment to have 4 sensors on either side of the segment, while the pitch segment has 4 sensors at the bottom of the segment. Thus, we have 100 sensors that could be placed over the entire 12-segment robot, and these 100 sensors can be scanned at 16 Hz. We built the 12-segment robot from our new design. We added a sleeve to protect and package all the wire when the robot moves over the terrain. As a first step, we decided to test on a reasonably simple terrain that has height variation only in the forward direction. We used laser cut wooden blocks of different heights to build this terrain. Cameras were placed around the setup. This motion capture system can track any object within the space when the LED markers are placed on the objects that need to be tracked. We added a marker holder to each segment, which allows us to track the positions of each segment during our experiments. To demonstrate how it works, we placed the robot on the terrain and turned on one of the motors. Here is a video of the camera showing the side view of the robot. We also have a side view from tracking. Each yaw segment has a sensor on either side, and the pitch segments have a sensor at the bottom. When some of the robot segments are actuated, you can see from here that there is a change in force that arises from the segment 8 be pushing against the edge of the terrain. This is very preliminary, and we need to do a more systematic study to better understand and make sure everything works well. Our next step is to see how these forces depend on the body configuration and deformation. Understanding this would help us in developing a sensory feedback control that would allow us to allow the robot to successfully traverse through any 3D terrain. We also aim to explore a more complex 3D terrain in the near future. With this, I would like to thank all the lab members for their support and also for their help across the various aspects of this study. Thank you.